look, it's recording. It'll be recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel as all the workshop recordings will be. And also, don't forget, we'll be making available the presentation that Wissam has been using today for anyone who would like to have that as well to look at. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it all over to Wissam to continue our conversation from yesterday. Thank you so much, all, and I will be in the background. Bye.
Hello, all. It's a pleasure again to be again with you. This is the second part of the presentation, the Arab World Post-Colonialism. Welcome, everyone. I hope that if you haven't caught the presentation live today, you will have the chance to see it recorded later. We are starting today from the Paris Peace Conference. So we went over the Arab world really since the beginning of the Islamic expansion that have expanded the Arab influence from the original lands where Arabs were, which are in the Levant, Iraq, and the Arab Peninsula and North Egypt. They were expanded all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, the African coast, and the Atlantic Ocean, and we went over all the dynasties that the Arab world has gone through, the Islamic dynasties that ended with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the last of the Islamic dynasties in 1920. 19 by the conclusion of World War I, 1915, 1916, the Arab world fell under the division of Sykes-Picot, a secret agreement between Britain and France. That was considered a betrayal to the McMahon and Hussein negotiated agreements that promised the Arabs an independent state that was from Turkey all the way to Yemen in what's called the Damascus Wall. And by the way, today we're going to have more time for discussion. So I'm planning to end this in about 30 minutes or give and take up to 45 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the time for discussion. I have a little supplemental piece. I'm going to take a vote at the end. If you want, I can present it, which is the history of the Arab flags. We can just give a brief overview. I find flags fascinating and they hold so much history in them. But given the circumstances that we live today and suppression on one flag specifically, which is the Palestinian flag, it would be interesting to understand the history of that flag. So we stopped last time at the. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the Paris Peace Conference in Versailles, 1919. That is the conference from which many of the national states were born. The Arabs. So just to recap, the Arab after the Arab Renaissance, which started in the early 19th century, all the way to the early 20th century, the Arab Renaissance have tried to bring back the Arab world from the age of decadence, that was the name given for the last 200 years of the Ottoman rule, that started treating the Ottomans started moving towards more Turkish nationalism, and they started treating most of their far lands that into they started treating them like colonies, which exhausted these areas. The Arabs suffered tremendously under the Ottoman rule, although they were given a general kind of protection that being part of the empire, you are by default protected by the Ottoman Empire, but that proved to be faulty by the ease of the British takeover of uh, Egypt and Egypt and Sudan were one area at that time. or the Italians taken over of Libya, or the French taken over Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria later on. So the Ottomans were not very interested in defending these areas. They had sometimes settled with certain agreements with the colonial powers to the benefit of their central state in Turkey, but to the harm and negligence of their citizens in further areas. This is one of the reasons the Arabs suffered under the Ottomans. There's many more reasons, and that led them to thinking more of nationalism. It started first with opposition, asking for more rights, and also creating a renaissance in literature and thought and language. But then that has became a national movement for separation once the Ottomans have responded to any demands of equality with actually harshness and suppression, and led it, that intention was used by the British. It was allied to the British, who have supplied weapons and a level of financing to the Arab revolt in return to them basically fighting the Ottomans out of their land, and they were promised to have autonomy over the Arab land. But that was betrayed very soon afterwards. And as I said in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1918, the Arab state was founded, and it was a constitutional monarchy led by Prince Faisal, who was voted as the king at that time and became King Faisal the first, the son of Sharif Hussein, whose his background is back from Hijaz area, which is today called Saudi Arabia. At that time, there was no such thing as Saudi Arabia. Saudi. The word Saudi is a name of a family that had nothing to do with that area specifically. So today we're gonna come to how Saudi Arabia came to be. So King Faisal that you see in the picture in front of you became that king, but this state did not last. The Arab flag was chosen, which is very close to the Palestinian flag, is the same as the Palestinian flag today, just with switching the black with the white. The position of the black and the white, that's the only difference. That was the Arab flag. I will talk later if I had time on the history of that flag, how it came about. And but it's a very Arab identity kind of a flag that comes from the history of the from Arab history and Arab culture. And that flag was flown over the main major cities of the freed area at that time, all the way from Mecca, all the way to Damascus, to Aleppo, to Beirut, to Haifa, to Jerusalem. The flag was risen in Jerusalem. It was not allowed to be raised once the British entered Jerusalem. In Beirut, when it was raised, the French got crazy. How they thought that this is a betrayal of Sykes-Picot Agreement, so they advised the British that if the flag doesn't come down, we're going to have to be sending troops to bring it down. So the British actually brought it down 9 days after it was risen in Beirut. So the Arab flag was raised in Beirut for 9 days only. And the tension between the Arab state, led by King Faisal, and the British started to get more intense. The feeling of betrayal became more obvious. The colonial intentions became more blatant, and it led to the clash between the French troops and the Arab army in 1920 in the Battle of Maysalun. in which, of course, with no weapons, actually King Faisal has dismantled the army because basically they had no weapons or bullets. So it was nonsense to face the French tanks and army. But nevertheless, the Minister of Defense, Yusuf al Azama, who's considered an Arab hero today, he has a sculpture in Damascus. He said, "I'm not gonna give in. I'm going to fight to the last bullet, and I will die with honor." So a group of the army, they refused the dismantling of the army, and they fought to the last bullet, and they actually were all martyred in this battle of Maysalun. King Faisal has left Damascus and went to the desert area south of that, what today we know as Jordan. And the French took over, refused. The French colonization was very, very harsh, was very racist. It treated the Arabs in a way that you would treat animals. They've looked at them down. There was a sense of racism in the way they treated them. And there's also a sense of revenge from the Crusades. So there was some um, religious extremism that was infiltrating the intentions and motives of many of the sides at that time. The French had that, and nothing is more symbolic than General Guru standing at the grave of Salah ad-Din, the person who has freed Jerusalem from the Crusades, and telling him that we are back. That was symbolic of the Crusades being in the back mind of some of the French officers and intentions. At any case, King Faisal decided to convert his resistance to a political nonviolent resistance. There was talks about doing military resistance. He thought that that's not going to be very effective given the disparity of power. So he decided to go to Europe to lobby. And this is the picture that you see in front of you is a group of Arabs. They were members of Al-Fatat, the Young Arabs Secret Society, and basically they were leaders of the army of the Arab Revolt. And they went to the Paris conference. By the way, he couldn't get to Paris easily because he is an enemy to Paris and he's wanted. So he had to go to Italy and stay for a while and try to find ways, with the help of Lawrence, trying to secure a diplomatic path into Paris. They succeeded with the help of the lobbying of Lawrence in Britain. He ran out of money in Italy. His father, King Hussein from Hijaz, from Mecca, started sending him some money, and they had to keep with their Arab traditions of hospitality. So everyone who would come to the hotel to greet and meet with King Faisal, they would be, they would stay at the cost of King Faisal. They would eat and drink while King Faisal had no source of money, so it was basically sent by his father. But that's some of the details of the story of him staying in Italy for about 6 to 9 months while he secured his path to Paris. In Paris, one of the biggest hopes for the Arabs in Paris were President Wilson of the United States 14 points. President Wilson have called on the 14 points, which one of them is that the end of colonialism and that people have the right for self-determination. That gave hope for a lot of the colonized people internationally. Uh, that gave a lot of hope for the Arabs, for the Egyptian also. Egyptians had a very parallel fight to what their brothers in Syria and Lebanon were doing, and they had their own mission from Egypt Al Wafid party that was representing independence in the Paris conference, and many other, of course, people from all over the world, from Africa and various parts of the world. They all had hope because of the American rhetoric that the 14 points of Wilson, the pictures of President Wilson were all over the world at that time, and they were celebrating the 14 points that he came up with. Unfortunately, it did not come to fruition for many reasons. Let's go about it one by one. So um, the Arab delegation appealed to U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, hoping that his 14 points, particularly the principle of self determination, would support their cause. Wilson's rhetoric raised Arab hopes that the United States would champion anti colonial independence, yet Wilson's support proved symbolic but ineffective. He failed to intervene meaningfully when France invaded Syria in 1920, dismantling the short lived Arab constitutional monarchy in Damascus. In short, the Arab political struggle at Versailles was a moment of profound disillusionment where dreams of self governance clashed with imperial realpolitik. The West stole democracy from the Arabs, and President Wilson, despite inspiring ideals, stood at the end by as European powers carved up the Arab world. He could not really move things forward, not in Europe nor even in the United States. He had opposition to him until he had his brain stroke and, basically left his presidency. But one positive thing that President Wilson did is he called for a commission to be sent to the Middle East to figure out what the people want so they can determine and give them the right for self determination. The British and French refused this idea, and then they accepted it, and then they tried to put hurdles in front of it. And when President Wilson felt that this is not going to move through, he decided to do it by himself. So it was a totally American commission. King Crane Commission was a fact-finding mission sent by President Wilson in 1919 to assess the wishes of the people in the former Ottoman territories, particularly in Syria. So when I say Syria, I mean Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan today. That area was called Syria during the Paris Peace Conference. It was led by Henry King and Charles Crane. The commission spent weeks meeting with local leaders, clerics, and everyday citizens. Its final report reflected overwhelming opposition to Zionist plans for a Jewish state in Palestine and strong support for Arab independence and unity under a constitutional monarchy, preferably with American guidance if any mandate was to be imposed. So the Arabs said, if you have to impose a mandate, then we will only accept American mandate because they had hope with the American ideals. This is very important to me as Arab American. I emphasize it within our Arab American circles that there are American ideals that has to be defended and has to be the light has to be shed on them to be the actual definition and guidance for America and not the continuous rhetoric of its administration. So, and with that, the Arab American identity is that identity that's trying to preserve the original American ideals and spirit that had struggles, as you know, from its birth, from the first moment, even in the writing of the Declaration of Independence that had so many drafts and had so many opposition. It was born out of that struggle, and that struggle continues to go on. And we should play a part as Arab Americans in that struggle. And I think also, of course, as a Green Party, that's what that's one of our ideals. The Commission warned that forcibly imposing Zionism against the will of the local population would lead to conflict and bloodshed. Despite its moral clarity and democratic foundation, the King Crane report was buried by the great powers. It actually sat in the desk of Wilson for a couple years before it was even read or published. It was ignored intentionally and it was published late. and France and Britain imposed colonial mandates, carving up the region and laying the groundwork for a century of instability that continues today. The King Crane report is available today, and it is you can buy it on Amazon. I claim that the King Crane report is the only policy that is representative of American ideal. I say that it is the only constitutional policy for the Middle East as far as the American policy. Everything that is after King Crane report was not based on American ideal. In my opinion, it was unconstitutional. It was either motivated by religious reasons or motivated by colonial reasons, imperial reasons, or more recently, campaign money and political money, which is dirty money. So, the King Crane report is the blueprint for peace, rooted in the voices of the Arab people themselves. Its core recommendations respect for self determination, rejection of settler colonialism, and a unified Arab region still offer a visionary solution to the crisis of the Middle East had the West chosen justice over empire. If anything, it probably should be updated, but you will find that the Arab opinion today, the popular opinion, the opinions of the people, have not drifted much far from the King's Crane Commission's finding. There is a book called America's Forgotten Middle East Initiative. So after World War One, you have all these. You have some states that had early independence, and then you had another wave after World War Two, and then you had an era of decolonization that was a little bit late. And then you had a little bit of modern formations or metamorphoses of the old structures. So the earliest country to receive independence, although all these independences, by the way, are kind of faulty independences. They're not 100% authentic, but nevertheless, they are considered independence. Of course, also I want to emphasize here that the fault for many of the uh, we don't it's never really a one factor or one side to blame. There is always a multiplicity and multiple layers of factors, and one of those layers is the Arab failure in the region to unite or to continue with their struggle, or sometimes inside strife for various reasons, also have weakened the resolve of colonialism in the region. So it's not only external reasons; it's also, of course, internal ones. But that needs a talk by itself. Today, we are focused on colonialism and the effect of colonialism on the Arab world. So Egypt received its independence in 1922 and Iraq in 1932, where King Faisal was appointed to Iraq finally. Of course, Syria continued to be under the leadership or the mandate of France. Lebanon in 1943, Syria in 1946, Transjordan in 1946, which today is known as Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan. And then you have the second wave after the World War II, which was Libya in 1951, Tunisia and Morocco in 1956, Sudan in 1956, and Kuwait in 1961. And then you had the last wave, which is Algeria in 1962, United Arab Emirates in 1971. My father has immigrated from Lebanon to UAE before UAE became independent in 1971, and he actually helped in the formation of the National Bank of Abu Dhabi, which became the National Bank of UAE in 1973. I was born a few years after that. UAE at that time was mostly desert. It's a development today from where it was at that time. Bahrain and Qatar at the same time, Oman. We're gonna go over some of these changes in more details. Post colonial challenges, nationalistic movements, pan Arab unity, and the Cold War all had influences on the post colonial structures of the Arab world. The way they have became independent was always with a lot of structures put in place to ensure colonial power is still in control, but in a soft way. So we'll give some examples about that. And you can today look at the Arab world in three distinct areas. The Maghreb countries, Maghreb means the West in Arabic. So the Western Arabic countries, which are basically the Northern African countries after Egypt. So that's Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. And these countries have, because of their distance from Central Arab world, they kind of had have their own also a little bit of their own branch of the Arab history. And Mashriq states, the eastern states, which Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and um, well, these are the eastern states, Al Mashriq Al Arabi, and the Gulf region. The Gulf region is basically, yeah, the countries that are on the Persian Gulf or Arabian Gulf, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Oman and Yemen also is not considered really part of the Gulf region, but they are in that region. They are not on the Arabian Gulf, but they are in the Arabian Peninsula. So each country had its story of independence. Morocco, for example, Morocco's path since independence in 1956 has been deeply shaped by its colonial past. The monarchy, which replaced direct colonial rule, retained centralized authority with France's support, ensuring stability but stifling deep democratization. France and Spain left behind unresolved issues, especially the Western Sahara, still a big problem. It is a huge area, an area between Mauritania, Algeria, and Morocco that is unresolved. Um, it contains, it always fuels regional conflict and tension with Algeria. Western powers, particularly the United States and France, have supported Morocco as a moderate ally, reinforcing the monarchy's dominance while avoiding pressure for serious democratic reforms. The colonial carving of borders ignored tribal and ethnic realities, leaving behind a nation state struggling to integrate Amazigh identity and Southern Sahrawi claims within a centralized monarchy. You will see a lot of these borders that were drawn by the West very unnatural. They were not drawn by anthropologists and historians. They were drawn usually by with economic and geopolitical um, intentions. I was shocked if you read a book called A Line in the Sand. It's a whole book about Sykes-Picot Agreement. I was shocked to learn that in the Sykes-Picot meeting that the map was drawn, there were Sykes and Picot, which are not even the ministers of the secretaries of state or the ministers of foreign affairs. They were lower level employees in the Ministry of the Exterior in the State Department of France and Britain, and that's tells you how belittling of that area, that it is not that serious for higher ups to be involved in the carving of that area. They gave it to lower employees, And if you read the history of Sykes and Pico themselves as individuals, they were very, um, um, you can say, racist individuals to the region. Lawrence, enemy of Sykes. He considered him totally unaware of the region and the people in the region. And if you read the memoirs of Sykes, you'll see how he looks at Arabs and Syria as uncivilized or as savages. Uh, while Lawrence went there to study archaeology as a student, and he lived among the people and learned the language, so he had a different experience in the region, and he really loved the culture and loved working with the Arabs, and he understood them much more than any other British person at that time. Um, so so in the meeting, the thing that shocked me in that meeting that carved the map of the Middle East, there was Sykes and there was Pico, and there were two other employees of the State Department, one from France, one from Britain, and there was a fifth person, and the only fifth person that was in that meeting was the president of the um, the Anglo-Persian oil company. So the the region was carved. The number one priority was basically the oil pipe from Kirkuk to Haifa. Britain wanted to secure oil to the Mediterranean through that line, and that was one of the priorities of carving that map. And that's why basically he told, Sykes told the person drawing the map, draw me a line from the first letter of Haifa, from the H of Haifa till the K of Kirkuk. Kirkuk is a city in Iraq that was the headquarters of oil production that was discovered at that time. So that is similar. That structure is similar to a lot of the maps drawn in the Middle East, with much um, negligence to any cultural um, or other factors in the region. So, yeah, hoping to finish really in 13 minutes. I'm gonna run through these really fast. So Libya, this is a picture of Omar al-Mukhtar. Omar al-Mukhtar is a resistance fighter in Libya, considered a hero, an Arab hero. The Lion of the Desert, Anthony Quinn played his role in the Mustafa al-Aqad movie, a beautiful movie about him. Libya's chaotic modern history is inseparable from its colonial past. Italy colonized Libya from 1911 till 1943, dismantled indigenous governance, devastated local economies, leaving behind a centralized, fragile state that Britain and France later carved into three administrative zones. When Gaddafi seized power in 1969, he did so amid Cold War rivalry, exploiting anti Western sentiment and oil leverage to keep foreign powers at bay while building a repressive regime. And after NATO's 2011 intervention under the pretext of humanitarian protection, but driven by strategic economic interests, the state collapsed entirely. And since then it has been chaos in Libya. So many players playing like gangs inside Libya, including Britain, the US, France, UAE, Turkey, Russia, Egypt. All these have hands inside Egypt. They have their people, their supply weapon for them. The area is Libya is so much carved. It's so much unstable. And then there's other factions like ISIS and other tribal factions that brought Libya back to total disaster. Although Gaddafi has actually brought Libya to a point where it was leading African unity and it was leading African reform after he gave up on Arab reform, but everything descended to chaos afterwards. And of course, it is by his own making. He's not free from blame because of the dictatorial way he ran the country. That's always something that pushes people to the edge in the Middle East. Tunisia was considered a modern state. It was one of the longest countries that were colonized by France. It gained its independence in 1956. And President Habib Bourguiba preserved much of the French administrative system, emphasizing education and women's rights, but enforcing strict political control. France and the West continued to support it as a modern state, but did not criticize or stop Ben Ali's basically police dictatorship, which suppressed dissent and funded European immigration policies. And by 2011, as I don't know if you know that, but the Arab Spring started from Tunisia. There's a person who have self-mutilated. He burned himself in a protest. He had a little cart that he sell fruits and vegetables on, and the army came and just the police came, beat him up, destroyed it, and kicked him out, and he couldn't feed his family anymore. And in protest, he burned himself and he died. And of course, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and people went onto the streets. And because of the cohesion of the Arab culture and the Arab world, the revolution or the Arab Spring spread very fast like fire all over the Arab world. Every single country had its own Arab Spring protests. Of course, the more repressive the country, the less of that news came about. For example, in Saudi Arabia, everyone who thought about coming out to the street disappeared forever. There was not even an attempt in the United Arab Emirates, because every attempt was basically made by the secret police to catch anyone who would have any inclination of getting out of the street. So the more repressive the countries, it was less possible for the Arab Spring to even breathe. But on the other hand, some of the countries, the Arab Spring actually succeeded in changing the regime or breaking the regime, but very fast did Western factors and external factors. Some of them are Arab, other Arab countries trying to interfere with the struggle, and it turned into a political infiltration in some countries, for example, like Syria, whose people actually revolted, and they had all the reasons to revolt against a suppressive regime. But it was they were the revolution or the Arab Spring or the protests in Syria were infiltrated by other countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, by United States. I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but just moving through this. So, just a little word about Tunisia. That today Tunisia has a democratic system, but it still is struggling with authoritarian order, and they are still in the path of creating true democracy. I think Tunisia has been improving little by little, moving forward, and it is promising. But a lot of the post-revolution politics in Tunisia has to do with IMF austerity, with the European uh, interference in imposing migration diplomacy, and a lot of US counterterrorism demands that puts a lot of weight on democracy in these countries. President Qais Said, who's been president since 2021, he is echoing colonial centralism and foreign backed security politics, showing that the only way to move forward is to have some sort of colonial inheritance. But eventually we can consider it as small steps towards true independence. Mauritania, it got its independence from France in 1960, but still also struggling with a lot of European pressure. I'm just gonna try to speed up through this. Algeria, the country of the million martyrs. Million people died in the struggle of its independence from France from 1954, the war, the Algerian War, 1954 till 1962. One of the bloodiest anti-colonial struggles in the 20th century. It left a deep legacy of trauma. Algeria today is living a trauma of independence. It is one of the most closed Arab states. It's very difficult to get into Algeria. The National Liberation Front adopted a socialist and authoritarian model in direct opposition to French influence. However, France continued to exert economic and cultural pressure, particularly through oil contracts and migration policies. The state's rigid post colonial structure, built on one party control and anti imperial rhetoric, was a fragile shell that cracked in the 1990s civil war after the military canceled elections that were influenced by international fears of Islamism and regional instability, further entrenched the military's grip on politics. Even today, Algerian resistance to Western influence defines its foreign policy, yet its domestic stagnation is in many ways a legacy of France's extractive colonial institutions and divide and rule tactics. Iraq was born out of Sykes-Picot Agreement. King Faisal struggled to create that state. He fought for the unity of it. There was no such thing as Iraq before. Before that, he created a cohesive country, uniting the south, which is Basra, which was colonized very early by Britain as an important port for its India's colony, and also united Mosul, which was claimed by the Turkey. It was until 1923 in the Lausanne Agreement that Iraq secured Al Mosul north of Iraq. So he played an integral part in uniting the country. He died young. There is some conspiracy theories about him being assassinated because he died out of a nurse's mistake in Switzerland. But at any case, King Faisal played a big part in putting this kingdom together or this country together. And his intention was it to be a base for independence of the Arab world. So he was supporting the Syrian resistance. His brother, King Abdullah, was working on the Palestinian independence until he was kind of bought or normalized by Britain and given Transjordan, east of the Jordan River, as a kingdom for him with a continuous salary. And, he settled. Now, some say that his intention was to take whatever he can and then try to push for more. But we see the results of that policy today, which is total um, submission to colonial will. In so King Faisal, the kingdom fell through, and in 1958, the military coup toppled the monarchy and reflected deep resentment to foreign domination. Basically, the British continued to try to impose their influence, which, when King Faisal was alive, he managed to put enough resistance to demands from the British, and that came to a breaking point few times during his life. And I think that has to do something with his early death, because if he stayed alive, it would not have continued. He would have clashed somehow with the British, because it was very tense. And there were moments where it got so close to actually putting him under house arrest. But then the kings that came after him were weaker, and the British influence became more and more apparent and blatant. That caused the military coup, which was also immature in 1958. And another uh, coup took place by the Ba'athists. Ba'ath is a new Arab revival but fascist party and there, and it is accepted today by most historians that the CIA supported the Ba'athist rise because it was against the uh, communist rule of Iraq or socialist rule of Iraq. And the Cold War maneuvering had an influence on the support of the Ba'ath, and by Iran's war, which was a proxy war, American proxy war, and a Gulf proxy war, Iraq entered into an 8 years war that brought it backwards. And then by 2003, US invasion, which you know the story after that. I don't need to tell you the story. Syria, it's amazing how, we have to read the news to make sure that we have the most updated version of the presentation. So, like Iraq, Syria's borders were drawn by Sykes-Picot, and let's jump to today. So, it gained independence in 1946. The Assad dynasty rose under the Ba'athist ideology also, and they were aligned with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had an influence on the stability of the Ba'ath in Syria. Civil war erupted in 2011, and of course, again, with foreign interventions, Syria was carved into spheres of influence. Russia and Iran and Turkey and US and the Kurdish forces and continuous Israeli strikes, and you have ISIS, etc. Now, on the role of the West in creating that chaos, there's an operation called Timber Sycamore. I know that Jeffrey Sachs mentions it a lot, and you can read more about it, about the CIA's role uh, with the help of the Gulf country. I don't know if we say Gulf countries separate from the CIA because the Gulf countries have a very strong intelligent ties with the United States, and sometimes one acts in proxy of the other. As you know, today, a former reformed ISIS or al Nusra fighter has taken over the country with promise of modernizing and protecting diversity. Now, he sounds very good when it comes to his rhetoric of reforming the country and protecting diversity and pushing forward for peace. But since he took over power, we haven't seen um, we haven't seen except things that cautious us regarding his true intentions or true ability to carry out his intentions, because there are two massacres so far, one with the Alawites and the other with the Druze more recently that took place. Israel had also bombed severely all the infrastructure of the army since he took power with no reason, with no provocation. And they also occupied a large part of South Syria. They occupied a part that is almost bigger than Lebanon. And they are only 15 miles south of the capital, Damascus, and they demanded that this area be demilitarized. We'll see what's going to happen in this region next. So, Lebanon, the French wanted always to have Lebanon as a colony. They've expanded the Mount Lebanon, that is the home for the Maronite Christians, the Lebanese Maronite Christians. They've expanded it to make it viable, and they've added a large part of the south area. They added Beirut and the coastal area to it. They added also a large area to be a good area for agriculture, which is called Biqa and Baalbek. And they basically made Lebanon, so they made it basically to be a viable country for the Maronites. Unfortunately, uh, this area that they've carved has 19 sects, and the sectarian division is just a puzzle. And they tried to solve it by designating different parts of the states for different sects, and that increased the sectarianism. and led to the civil war in 1975, which ended in 1991. And then you had Israel in the south, which occupied South Lebanon. It actually occupied Beirut as the first Arab capital to be occupied by Israel after Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem was not announced as a capital at that time yet, but they've so Beirut is considered technically the first capital that Israel has occupied in 1982. My great grandmother from my father's side died during that occupation. She was running away with a taxi, and they an airplane hit the taxi and bombed the taxi, and she died. Um, the and today, the recent news. Lebanon is still struggling with its sectarian divisions, and still also struggling with the Israeli occupation, which got renewed now after the last war because the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, called Hezbollah, they insisted on doing tactical attacks against Israeli positions in North Palestine uh, to support or in demand of stopping the genocide in Gaza. But Israel's retaliation was very severe, and it led to a total war which devastated the country. And today, a large area is still occupied by Israel again in South Lebanon. By the way, they had occupied a region for about 15 years, but the resistance kept fighting until it freed it in about the year 2000. And then now there is a new area that is being occupied, few cities in the south, and also few cities and villages have been wiped out, and the Israelis are preventing any rebuilding of these villages. And there are continuous strikes on Lebanon. Israel, although there is a ceasefire, they have continuously broken the ceasefire with tactical attacks in South Lebanon. As we speak today, there must be a one or two attacks. That's a daily habit now in Lebanon. All right, I'm gonna try to stop. Actually, I have to force myself to stop because we're out of time. Um, so the story continues. I mean, with all the Arab countries, one by one. In general, the Gulf countries were basically tribes that were living on fishing, and some of them are Bedouin tribes. And there was also some other trades. And the British, because they used the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf for their ships to go through from India to Basra in Iraq, they had treaties with these tribes to have protection for them. They had, they give them money and protection, and the tribes will basically protect the route of the British, whether it is army or the British trade, the India Company. And these agreements with the British have grown. Once oil was discovered, they moved from being protectorate of the British. Ottomans were not interested in it, and they moved to become actual countries. And they split them into very small states that did not really make sense at all. So Sheikh Zayed, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, he went around and he negotiated some of these states coming together. He was able to get them together. First, Bahrain and Qatar were part of it in 1971. Then they exited in 1972, and United Arab Emirates were formed in 1973 under British, really, a colonial framework. With the British rights for oil and production, etc. British, the rulers are basically taught in British academies. They're prepared for leadership. It's basically a very strong post-colonial, pro-British, pro-American structures that are in place. It's a total monarchy, zero democracy or representation. There is no elections whatsoever. Some countries have moved a little bit forward, like Kuwait, to creating some additional houses that can be elected. Final word, if I have time for a final word.
Yes, you do.
All right, final word. Ah,
We have about 15 minutes.
oh, we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make it for, I'm going to pretend that we don't. But really, I want to come to a conclusion because we can talk about each country for hours, but at the end, there are dependencies that were built in the Arab world, and I'm going to just jump into examples instead of talking about it in general. So there's a mandate system. There's These are all artificial borders. Most of the borders between Arab countries are not finalized. They don't make sense. There's no framework of drawing them, so they keep them unfinalized because opening up the subject will just become chaos. And they're very dependent structures. The prime minister, the deputy prime minister of Iraq, in a last interview with Reuters, said that there is no possibility for economic renaissance in the region in its current structures, in its current fragmentations. Um, Security dependencies, economic dependence. I'll give you an example. The United States maintains over 90 military bases across the Arab countries. They host about 40,000 troops. That's in the mid 2025. Um, for example, in the last Iran strike, Iran launched missiles at the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, revealing the Gulf Arab states' reliance on American missile defense. Host countries had limited capacity to defend themselves. Actually, the rocket defense system that was bought by the United Arab Emirates, it was totally under control of the Americans, that they moved them to Israel because they needed them more, although they were totally purchased by United Arab Emirates. But that tells you that all this purchasing and all this apparent things do not mean anything. It is basically American bases. Djibouti, for example, is a hub for Western military operations. Djibouti, the whole country, is a country that is a military base for France and the US and now Japan and EU, believe it or not. So, then there's security dependencies and there is economic dependencies, the high debt rate. Countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, they have ballooning external debt, often exceeding 100% of the GDP, with heavy reliance on Western lenders, IMF fund, conditionally to balance budgets, constraining economic sovereignty. Major trade dependencies also by the US and EU. There is also, so I can go on in giving examples of these economic dependencies, security dependencies, the way it's exerted to practice political control, economic control, military control. My conclusion is that the area is still colonized, but in a method or phase of colonialism. Their independence is not authentic. It does not represent the free and will of the people and the right of their self-determination. And the presence of the biggest obstacle inside the Middle East, which is the Israel's colonial project, as you see today, will continually pose a threat to the stability of the region and to its renaissance and to its advancement. I will stop at this point. I'm going to share this presentation so you can. There's 85 slides. You can, glide over it at your convenience. Thank you very much for going through a history lesson. My wife tells me, she hated the history in school. She got to marry a historian at the end of the day. So we'll open the door for any of your comments or questions.
Thank you so much for a great presentation. And indeed, we'll do a Q&A session here. We have about 10 minutes. So anyone, if you would like to ask a question of Wissam here, please put it in the chat. Like just use your handy dandy little fingers and type it on out, and we'll be able to take it. If you have any positive feedback as well, you could offer that. Uh, of course, that's great. I'll open with a question then to sort of break the ice to so people don't feel it. Okay, so you were touching on like post World War II colonialism and how the Arab world was divided essentially between oil powers for indeed the extraction of oil. And you talked briefly about the sectarian divisions and violence which have arisen because of these arbitrary borders. In your opinion, do you think that there is an easy or let's say natural solution to the border issue of the modern nation states in the Arab world?
I in my book, the awaited Arab state, that is what I focus on. I focus on what is the solution, what is the realistic solution. You cannot correct history, so what can we build on today? And in summary, there's two stages. One stage is a political renaissance based on Enlightenment values. So I present in the book, which is also has been separated into a separate book for explanation called the Universal Declaration of Human Values. But I present 20 values that have evolved throughout our modern history to be the bases and columns of modernizing civilization and building civilization based on equality and democracy and what is best for people and what's best for governance. So the Arab world has to have an intellectual awakening. It has to adopt these concepts because everything else is going to be um, made of carton. It's not solid. It's going to be uh, not authentic, not solid. I had a meeting with one of the representatives of the Ministry of um, Culture of Saudi Arabia in Paris. And I told him I love the renaissance that's taking place in Saudi Arabia. I love what's going on. I love all the economic development, all the cultural development, the opening on art. But to make this authentic, you have to have a minimum set of values that have been tried in history. The deprivation of these values will always be a hurdle in front of true advancement, and their presence will always be a formula for their advancements. At least I'll mention two to you. One is a path to citizenship, which just does not exist in Saudi Arabia. I was born in United Arab Emirates and lived for 13 years there, do not have any right of citizenship. Um, Even if my mother was a United Arab Emirates citizen, I still don't qualify for citizenship. There is no path for citizenship. Citizens are about 17% of the population only over there. So the same thing with Saudi Arabia. Why would I build a country that I cannot be a citizen of? So everyone there is have in the back of their mind that they're always there temporarily. They want to extract success and then go settle where they can at the end, some place that they can own and call home. And the second is freedom of expression. You cannot build any progress with suppression. It will be fake progress. So the first thing is values, and the second thing for this region to move forward, it needs some sort of confederation. I propose in the book a confederation. Confederation. Each country keeps its structure, its president or king or whatever, but you have a common market, you have an economic ties, you have open borders, you have defense, because you have to have an authentic, strong entity to protect your will and interest instead of depending on external entities that at the end of the day they don't have your best the best intentions.
That's very true. A couple of comments then in the chat. Uh, Nassim says, "Thank you very much for the amazing history of the region." Amy is wondering if Arab folks from disparate nations living outside the region, such as here in the US, Canada, or UK, are able to work collaboratively on these issues. And there is a question from Henry asking if you could, hopefully briefly, summarize the conflict between the Sunni and Shia traditions. That might be outside the scope of this conversation, but maybe you could give it a go.
Yeah, no, actually, I will emphasize that it is impossible to summarize. I'll probably fail to summarize, but I'm both trained in Sunni Islamic school of thought. I have a licence diploma from Al Azhar University, which is the university that is the leader in the Islamic studies under the Sunni school of thought. And I've also learned through distance study in Qum in Iran, according to the Shia school of thought, which is my family's background. And I've had high levels of Islamic studies with them. So uh, I have a lot to say about this topic, and maybe we can create a workshop about it one day. But it is 90% political and 10% religious, if there's any difference at all. Most well-aware Muslims cannot uh, classify themselves as Sunni or Shia. It takes a level of um, lack of understanding of Islam to classify yourself religiously. You can classify yourself ethnically or culturally, but religiously, I claim that it is almost a made up classification that is not authentic, but politically, it has been made into two different camps. Um, Says wondering if Arab folk from desperate nations living outside the region, such as, in the book, Amy, I claim, and every time I have an interview, I emphasize that because the Arab diaspora is ignored. The Arab diaspora, which created Al Fatat, created the young Arab society in Paris, and they created the first Arab Congress in Paris in 1913, 2 years before World War One or 1 year. They have always played a part in, because of the freedom of expression, because of living outside the complexities of the politics of the region. They always played a part in the renaissance of the region and the reawakening of the region. And I think today they also can play a big part in that, especially with their power, with their financial power, with their intellectual power. I think the diaspora has a big role to play, but also America has a big role to play. And that was the idea of the American Revolution in the beginning of the founding of the state is that we are going to carry these ideals. We're going to be the example of carrying these ideals. And we influenced so many other revolutions in the world because of it. We need to bring America back to these ideals.
So this might lead us into our good last question. Then we have about 3 minutes, and so the last question from Lizzie is: could you share your thoughts on Palestine and how we as Greens can improve our solidarity efforts?
I think we Greens are doing a great job, both on our platform, on our stance, on our rhetoric, and on our activism towards Palestine. Um, I cannot tell you really that we need to do anything more than what we are doing. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but uh, I am impressed and I am loyal to the Greens because of their authenticity to their values in that sense, while many others have failed. So, but if someone asks me intellectually, what's your stance on Palestine, I refer you to Ellen Pape, who is an Israeli historian, and I actually have my opinion about Palestine have been shaped by him because of his very deep understanding of the history of Palestine. I would say he's one of the top five scholars on this subject. Of course, also Rashid Al Khalidi, who has the chair of Edward Said in Columbia University, and he wrote The Hundred Years' War on Palestine. He was part of the Oslo negotiations. He's also a very amazing resource. But as far as history, Ellen Puppy is his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. I always buy copies and I give it as a gift to any person around me who's running for politics because that's the good background.
That is a perfect answer to that. I think we'll be able to put a link for those books in our chat, so it'll be like recorded in the official recordings, so that'll be easy for people to find later on. We have reached the end of our workshop today, Greens. I want to remind you that we have in about 15 minutes coming up on the main stage will be our green mingle. Is it a gringle? I don't know, but it's a mingle with greens, right? So just a social space to hang out, say hi, talk to all the people. This is taking the place of our social spaces that we would have at an in-person convention where we would have that kind of opportunity to mix and really connect with each other in a more personal way. As you all know, most of our party is run right now at the national level through virtual connections, which, though good and better than, let's say, letters, actual snail mail, we still miss a lot by being in person. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being committed to expanding your understanding about the situations in our world which are impacting us, specifically, of course, the situation in Palestine and all across the Arab world. A few more reminders about events for today. So the mingle is coming up on the main stage here at 2 o'clock, and it'll go for about an hour and a half. And then later on at 4, so this is my time, so 4 o'clock on the West Coast. This will be 7 p.m. for you on the East Coast. We'll be having our immigration panel, and I strongly encourage you to attend if you can. It'll be a robust discussion. Of course, we're all quite aware of the situation with immigration in the United States at this moment. And then at 6 p.m. tonight, there'll be a series of open houses with our identity caucuses, the National Black Caucus, the Latinx Caucus, and the National Lavender Greens will all be on different stages. The Black Caucus will be on the main stage, the Latinx Caucus will be on the peace stage, and the National Lavender Green Caucus will be on this stage right here, where you get to talk to me. Yeah, and our secretary, Chanel Pittman. So I hope to all see you at our next session, which is mingling, and then after that, which is our immigration panel. Thank you very much for being here today with us. Thank you, Wissam, for a great presentation, and good luck on your candidacy here in the Green Party for your election. If folks here are, if you're a national delegate and you have not voted yet, there are pending votes. Please go out to your national vote list and cast your votes while there are still time to do it. We have several elections which are pending. So thank you all very much, and I will see you in the future. Bye, everyone.